So what is up people, welcome to the new video, and in this video we will be deploying a React application to GKE, and we will be using Pulumi for writing our infrastructure as code. So we will be using JavaScript as a language for writing our code to deploy our infrastructure. We will create our GKE cluster and a deployment object and a load balancer service for deploying our React application on Google Kubernetes engine. So let's see what will be our directory structure here. So in our root directory, we will have a React application folder here. So this will be our to-do list application, and one directory we will create for adding our Pulumi code. So inside React directory, in this we have all the files for our React application, source files and package.json file, etc. And we will have the Docker file also here. And inside Pulumi, we will write our code in JavaScript. We will use Kubernetes provider here. In Pulumi, we will use GCP provider here. So why we use GCP? To create the GKE cluster, and we will use Kubernetes to create the deployment object and our load balancer service, right? Load balancer service. So here are these technologies we will be using: Google Cloud, Kubernetes, Pulumi, and Docker. So let's see what will be the basic architecture of our application. So here if you see, we will deploy our React application. So this is basically a React application, and this is a React application, right? So we will build a Docker image for it. So we will build Docker build. So we will build a Docker image. So it will be a Docker image for this React application, and we will push this image to Google Container Registry, right? We will push it to GCR. So when we push it to GCR, we will have a specific URL, let's say us.gcr.io, my project ID and my image name, right? So this is the basic, like a specific URL we will get of our image, and we will use this URL to deploy our Docker container image on the GKE cluster using the deployment object. Then we will create a deployment object in Kubernetes, deployment object, and in this we will deploy, we can set the replicas, let's say okay 1 or 2, whatever we will set inside the Pulumi code. We will add all these things, all these configurations inside the Pulumi code. We will not use any YAML files, we will use only the Pulumi code here. And inside the deployment object, when we deploy the deployment object, we will get a pod, and inside that pod you will get the container running for your React application, right? But we want to expose it also so that everyone can access it. So we will deploy a load balancer service. We will deploy a load balancer service here, and we will map it to the port of our container right here. So let's start writing our Pulumi scripts, and let's see what are the steps for building this complete DevOps project, how we can deploy this React application to GKE and using Pulumi. So now let's go through our steps how we can deploy this React application to GKE. So here you can see this is our directory structure. In our directory we have two directories. One is for to-do list application and one is for Pulumi code. So in this you can see we have already a directory for React to-do list application here. If you want to know about how to build this kind of a to-do list application, so you can check out our video. We already have how to build a to-do list application with React. So I already have a Docker file here inside this for this React application, you can see. So now just go through this React application. Let's see how it looks like. So I will go inside this and I will start my React application in a development environment using npm start. So here you can see this is a to-do list app. I can remove tasks, I can add tasks, let's say task or something here, add task, I can remove task. So here it is running on my development server. Let me close it. Now what we need to do is we will build this application using Docker, and we will publish it as a Docker image on GCR. Then we will use that Docker image to deploy this application on GKE. So here we have the Docker file. Now what we need to build this image, and then we need to push it to GCR, right? So here you can see the step is build Docker image for our React to-do list application. So we can use this command build docker build, and we will use this host name, and this is a specific path we need to assign to every image if we are deploying any image to GCR, right? So here we will have the project ID or GCP project ID, and this will be our image name, right? We can also add tag here, so it will keep the latest if we are not passing any tag here. Then we will push this image to GCR. Then we will start writing our Pulumi script. So first of all, let's build our Docker image. So I am inside my directory for my React application. In my React application directory, now I have the Docker file here, right? Now I will run docker build tag us.gcr.io, and now I will add the project ID, right? So my project ID is this. Now after the project ID, I will add the React to-do list app. So this will be the image name. So let me change a little bit here, to-do list app, right? So, and from where I want to build this image, from the current directory, right? So now it is building the image for my React application, right? So if you want to go through this Docker file, you can also see here we have two base images here. First we are taking Node.js as a base image, and we will build this application using npm run build, right? Then we will take this build folder from the builder, this builder step, and we will take this build folder, and we will copy this build folder from builder to our nginx folder here. So we are taking nginx here as a base image. So now it is building, it is running all the steps that are defined inside the Docker file. So now it is running npm run build. So now if you want to go to the GCR console, so you just need to search GCR for the container registry, and inside the container registry you can see your images. So this is a image already, React to-do list app that I have already, but I will delete it. I will push my new image here. Now you will see there is no image. This is my service image, and now my image is built here. Now I will check the images using docker images. So you can see here I have this image us.gcr.io, this complete. I will copy this name of my docker image and I will push it, right? So it will be pushed to my GCR, Google Container Registry, right? So I am already authenticated with my Google Cloud. If you want to authenticate with your Google Cloud, you can authenticate using G Cloud. So you just need to install the G Cloud SDK in your local machine, and then you can just G Cloud init or G Cloud login. So you will be logged into your G Cloud account, right? So now my image is pushed here. Now if I refresh it, you can see my image is here and it is pushed inside the GCR, right? So now let's see the next steps. So our next step is we need to start writing our Pulumi scripts. So first of all, we need to create a directory for our Pulumi code. So I'm creating mkdir Pulumi. So I have created a Pulumi directory. Okay, sorry, I have created this directory inside the React application. Let me go outside of it, and now I will create the Pulumi directory here. So my Pulumi directory is created. Now I will go inside the Pulumi directory. Now I need to initialize a new Pulumi project. So I will use GCP JavaScript template for it. So project name I will keep as React GKE. Description I will not add anything. Stack name I will keep it default dev. For passphrase I am keep it empty. So for the GCP project I will provide it the GCP project ID. So now it is installing all the required dependencies that need to build the infrastructure for our Google Cloud, right? Okay, so now it's saying your project is ready to go. Just ignore these warnings for Pulumi new version. Now let's go inside, go through our Pulumi project. Here you can see it has installed node modules, and there is a index.js file, right? So inside the index.js file you can see the code is there for creating a GCP storage bucket, but we do not need to create any storage bucket here. So I will remove this code, and I will remove this export variable also. Now what we need, if you go to the steps here, so you need to install another package for Kubernetes. So here you can see we only have packages for like the Pulumi and GCP. I have package only for GCP, but I need to configure Kubernetes provider also, because I need to deploy some Kubernetes objects, right? So deployment object and load balancer service. So I will install another dependency. So you can see the dependency is npm install Pulumi Kubernetes. So I need to install it, right? So just run this command here, it will be installed. So now we need to set the GCP project. So GCP project is already set. If you go to pulumi.dev.yaml, you can see GCP project is set here. Now what we need to specify the location. So I will add this configuration also. So I will say Pulumi config set GCP location US Central 1C, right? So here you can see my location is added inside this GCP. So what is config here in Pulumi dev.yaml? So what is Pulumi dev.yaml? It is basically a file, setting file for my dev stack. So Pulumi works based on stack. So I have created the dev stack as default. So inside the dev stack we have this settings file for the dev stack, and here I have configs. So configs just like variables you can use inside your code, right? So these are some, you can also have secrets inside this, but you can also have directly the config variables like this. So what is GCP? So it's just like a prefix, like let's say if you want to have some variables or configs related to GCP, so you can have GCP as prefix here. If you want some Kubernetes config, so you can add Kubernetes here. Also you can create some direct some variables kind of in configs, right? So now let's go to our index.js. Now we have installed a new library, you will see here, that is Pulumi Kubernetes, right? So now we need to require it. So I will say const Kubernetes is equal to require Pulumi Kubernetes, right? Now what we need to do, we need to write the code for creating our cluster, right? So here also you can see we need to require this location, right? So GCP configuration, right? So as you know, like we have these config variables here, so you can require these config variables inside your code and you can use it, right? So how you can require them, you just need to run like GCP config. So I can require every configurations, like for GCP, if I have some AWS, so I can require some for AWS config. So I will add here new Pulumi config dot config and the GCP. So I need config variables for the GCP only. So this will require only GCP variables like location and project, right? So now just set here region is or zone, sorry, yeah, right. Zone is equal to GCP config dot require location, right? So why I'm adding location here, you can see in pulumi.dev.yaml, it is GCP location, right? So I'm requiring this location, so this variable will be fetched here inside my code, right? Now what we need to do is we need to create a GKE cluster, right? So if you are using a free trial account in GCP, so just follow my rules, what I am setting here, just follow my same configurations here for the cluster. So here what you need to write for creating a GKE cluster. So we will write code, let's say const cluster is equal to GCP dot container dot cluster, right? And inside the cluster just specify the name, let's say my cluster here. Now you will specify your main arguments, your metadata for your cluster, right? So first of all, the name. So name will be my first cluster, and location we already have zone here, so we will provide this variable here, zone. Now initial node count, how many nodes we need, let's say 3, right? Now minimum master version, we will say latest, right? Now add the node configurations, machine type, so just follow the same for this node configuration, because if you are using G-Cloud free trial account, right? So machine type, we will keep G1 small and disk size will be only 32, right? So just keep the same configuration as I did here for the cluster. And now when we create the cluster, so it will give us an endpoint for the cluster, right? So that we can connect with it. So for the endpoint, let's export the variable for the endpoint, right? So exports dot cluster IP is equal to cluster dot endpoint, right? Now it is set as output, so it will give us the output. So can we start running our Pulumi scripts? So it will create the GKE cluster. Yeah, we can run our Pulumi scripts. So but we need to write the deployment and load balancer service also, but we will keep that later, we will do that later. But now let's create our GKE cluster first, right? So what we need to run, we need to just run Pulumi up command. So Pulumi up will run this code and it will create all the resources that we define inside the JS script or any script you are using for Pulumi. So I will say Pulumi up, I will keep it blank. So we are getting an error here like invalid or unknown key. So we are getting this because of this location. So in GCP there is no config like location. So let's add zone here, and here also we will define zone, right? Now just run the command Pulumi up and let's see. Okay, so do yes. So now it is saying it is creating the cluster, right? So now in the console, let's go to Kubernetes engine and let's see our clusters here. So you see it is being created, my first cluster here. So let's wait for it, let it be created. So after the creation of this cluster, what we will do, we will write the configurations in Pulumi for creating a load balancer service and a deployment object. Then let's go to a new tab and let's see our image, right? Our Docker image we have published to GCR, right? So just search here container registry. You can see our application image is here, React to-do list app. So it is a private image in private container registry here. So let's see, our container cluster is being created. It takes some time to be in the running state, so let's wait for it. Yes, so now our cluster is created and it's saying here it is in the running state, right? So now what we need to do is, first of all, we need to configure a Kubernetes provider here, right? So we have already installed Kubernetes package for our Pulumi here. You can see Pulumi/Kubernetes. And now what we need to configure the Kubernetes provider, because we need to connect our this cluster to our Kubernetes provider, right? So that our deployments and our all the Kubernetes objects can be created inside of this cluster, right? So let's say you want to connect this cluster to your machine, to your local machine, so you can use this command, right? But we have created our cluster using Pulumi infrastructure as code, and now we need to add some configurations here so that it will be connected, right? So if we go to the Pulumi documentation here, they have this tutorial how you can configure the Kubernetes provider for GKE, right? So there you can find this kubeconfig file that we need to create. So you just need to copy it, right? So this is export const kubeconfig, and so this is a basic kubeconfig file. And in this, basically you need a GKE gcloud auth plugin also installed in your local machine if you are running, so you can install using gcloud components. So just copy it and paste it here. You can say define or kubeconfig. So this is the kubeconfig file I have added here. Let's see first all the variables are correct or not. So gcp.config.project we have .zone. What is name here? Name is coming from this parameter here, right? Now cluster.endpoint, cluster is okay, all things are okay. Now context we are creating here. Okay, now everything is okay here, right? So now we have our kubeconfig here. This is basically a variable. Now we need to use this kubeconfig to add the configurations for Kubernetes provider here. So you can see we need to create a Kubernetes provider that use our cluster, right? So we can use this code. We can just copy it and paste it here. So you can see kubeconfig, we are taking kubeconfig from this variable that we have specified or declared before, right? And name, in this name you can specify, let's say, Kubernetes provider here. Okay, so now we have created a cluster provider. So now we need to use this cluster provider every time when we need to create or deploy any Kubernetes object here, right? So first of all, what we need to deploy here, first we need to deploy a deployment, right? Kubernetes, create a deployment for the application, right? So now if you go to here this repository, so sometime before we did a project where we deployed this there was a Node.js application. We deployed a Node.js application to GKE, and there we used this deployment YAML file. So here we are not using YAML file, we are only using Pulumi, right? So using Pulumi, how we can do that? So you can see this is the configuration. We need to apply the same kind of configuration for the deployment, but we will use Pulumi here. So first of all, what we need, their API version v1 and kind deployment. So first of all, just create a variable deployment is equal to new, and here use Kubernetes apps.v1. You can see here we were using apps v1/v1 version here, right? From v1, what we need to create? We need to create the deployment. right? So what will be the name of the deployment? First specify, let's say my deployment or something, right? Or let's say app deployment. Now here the second file, this object, sorry, we need to add comma here. Here in this object we need to specify our main configuration for our deployment. So you can see what is the main configuration here, metadata. So add the metadata here, right? So in metadata, let's add the name. So name, let's say app deployment. Okay, and then what we need to add here, you can see in the YAML file as the same. You need to add spec, open a object here for specs. Now inside what we need to specify, replicas, how many replicas we need. So we will add on the one replica here. Okay, now what we need to add, we need to add the selector here. So you can see selector, we need to match labels. So labels, like we need to add some labels on some pods, so on some containers also, right? So you can see this is the template for the container for the pod. So in the pod we are also adding the labels. So these two labels, like type backend and app node app, these two labels we need to match here for every replica for the selector. Okay, so now for labels we are not adding every time here the same labels. Let's create labels before. So I'm saying const react app labels, and I'm creating an object here for the label, and the label I'm adding app react to do app. Okay, and here match, here I need to add selector, right? Or in selector I need to add match labels. So for matching labels I will add this variable here only, react app labels. That's it, right? So now in the spec we need to open template. So here we will define the template for our pod. So here add the metadata. On metadata we add the labels. So labels we will add the same react app labels, right? So in the template also for the pod we will specify the specs. So let's go here. You can see in the template also first object was metadata. So this also had some name, and another one was object was specs, right? So here we will specify the containers, or containers will be inside the pod, right? So here add spec, right? Now in specs add containers name. So for containers you focus here, if you notice this container is not an object, so this will be a list, right? So just open here a list, not an object, JavaScript, and here first object will go for first container. So we will have only one container in one pod here. So we will create it, and let's specify the name. So name will be, let's say app container or react app container, right? Now the image, so this is the main variable here for the image. So image, let's see what was the image URL of our application. So if you can copy, you can copy here, copy full image name, and you can just paste it here. So you can see us.gcr.io/our project name and the image name, right? So I'm just removing this SHA here, we don't need, because it will select from the latest tag by default, right? Now specify the ports, we need to open some ports here. Okay, let me add the comma, ports. So ports will also be a list. So first port will go container port, that will be 80, right? Okay, so this is our configuration for our deployment here, metadata, specs, and now what we need to configure the provider here. So what was the provider we created? This cluster provider. So use that here, open a new object here, add the provider provider will be cluster provider, right? So now our deployment configuration is ready here. So now what we need to do, just run Pulumi up and let's create our deployment, right? Okay, so what's it saying? Export const. Okay, okay, so that was, so this variable was for TypeScript here, so we cannot use like this. I will not export it. I will just use like const cube config is equal to. Okay, now just hit Pulumi up. Do yes. Okay, so it has created the provider, then it is creating the deployment. So it has created the deployment, right? And you can also check inside your cluster, go to workloads. You can see in your workload the deployment is ready. So you can see app deployment is okay and its status is completely okay. Now what we need to create a load balancer service for accessing this application, right? So how we can do that? Here you can see this is a YAML for creating a load balancer service. So kind service version v1. So just let's create a service here. Just create a new variable. Service is equal to new Kubernetes dot core dot v1 dot service, and here let's name it like app service, and here also specify provider. Already I'm specifying the provider, cluster provider. Now here I will add the configurations for my service, right? So in the YAML also you can see, first of all we need to add the metadata, and we need to, in this spec we need to add the type of the service, that will be load balancer, and then we need to add the selector that will select a specific labels, right? So here let's add metadata. So in metadata add a name. So name, let's say React app load, or let's say LB service. Okay, now after metadata what we need to add, we need to add specs. So in the specs first we add the type of your service, that will be load balancer, right? Now we need to specify the ports here, right? So ports will be a list. You can see here ports is a list, and here in the list add first port, that will be port will be 80. So our, this is our service port, so our service port will be 80, and the target port will also be 80 from our container, right? Now add the selectors here. So selectors, how you can add, you just add React app labels. So now it is okay, completely configuration is okay for creating our load balancer service. You can see now what we need, let's export the public IP from this service, right? So that we can access the our application using that IP address, right? So it will give us an external IP from which we can access our application. So just exports dot service public IP, let's say, and service dot status dot apply. So this is apply is basically a Pulumi kind of functionality that it provides. So it's kind of a callback function here, and I will use s as a parameter, s dot load balancer dot ingress, and so this ingress will be an array, and I will take the 0 position of the array, and here I will get the IP here, sorry, IP. So this IP we will get as export variable. So now what we need to just run the Pulumi up command. Let's do yes. Okay, so now you can see it is creating the service also. So after creating the service, it will give us the output variables, so in the output it will give us the service IP also. So using that service IP we can access our application. So it is saying it is created, service is created, and just copy this service IP address and paste in your browser, right? So you can see our to-do list application is working here. So it is completely deployed on our Kubernetes cluster, and we did not use any manual commands. We just used this Pulumi script. So now whenever you need to deploy, you just need to run this Pulumi script, and also you can change your image if you want to deploy some different kind of app. So you can change your image URL, right? And just you need to hit the Pulumi up command and your application will be deployed. And now let's clean up our all the environments. So we just need to run Pulumi destroy, so our every resource will be destroyed, right? So it's saying deployment is deleted, service is deleting. So let it delete everything, so it will take some time. So now everything is deleted here using Pulumi. So now if you just hit the Pulumi up, so you can, your application will be deployed directly on the Kubernetes cluster. So it will create the cluster, then it will create the deployment and the service, and it will give you the public service IP, right? So using this you can write your own, you can deploy your own application if you want. So you just need a Docker image for that. You can directly push your Docker image to GCR, and if you have any open image on Docker Hub, so you can use that also. So thanks for tuning into my channel. I hope you found the content valuable. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button to stay up to date with our latest videos. Thanks again, and I will see you in the next video.